Welcome to the Remote Teacher Podcast. We're excited to have you here. I'm Hakea Hustler, an experienced regional, rural and remote teacher, author of children's, middle and YA books and co-creator of the Facebook group Teachers in Remote Communities Past, Present and Future, along with Carl Merrison and Lynette Gordon, and the co-owner of website The Remote Teacher. The Remote Teacher podcast and all our support platforms come from a passion to improve the experience of remote teachers and in turn create positive outcomes for our remote students and communities. You can find out more about us on www.theremoteteacher.com.au, over on our Facebook group, Teachers in Remote Communities Past, Present and Future, and of course by listening to this podcast. Now remember, you can also download these podcasts so you don't need internet access and you can listen to them wherever you need, including on your long drives out to your remote and rural communities. Please remember to like us on Facebook, on Instagram, and by signing up to our email list. And before I introduce our guest for today, it's important to acknowledge that the discussions that we have here are the opinion of the guest and myself alone and do not represent anyone, including Department of Education or any particular organisation, unless, of course, they've come on stating that they're representing that organisation. It's also important to consider First Nation peoples, communities, students and families are all diverse and unique, and what works for our guest and myself may or may not work for you, your students, your families, your communities and your schools. So take what you need, leave what you don't, sit back and enjoy. Let's begin.
So I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm meeting on today, the Angamuti, Adambaya, Watani, Yaragana and Gurang peoples of the Northern Peninsula area.
And I'd like to acknowledge the Bundjalung people of Northern Rivers, New South Wales, and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any elders or Aboriginal people listening to our podcast today. So welcome, Maddi. I'm happy to have you on.
Thank you for having me. It's very exciting.
Can you introduce yourself and share us a little bit about your personal and professional career leading up to this remote teaching experience?
Yeah, so I am early career teacher would be the best term for it. So I started teaching in 2021, just after COVID, and went straight into remote teaching, which was very exciting. Before I was a teacher, I worked as a paralegal for 5 years at a community legal centre. And so we specialised in family law and domestic violence, and we did lots of outreach to women in remote communities. So that was kind of where the passion started, because there was the understanding that there's always such a greater need once we leave the metro for good services, good teachers and good people to support everyone around Australia, not just the people that have the privilege of living in a major city.
Yeah. And also you would have seen the impact of some of those things on people around Australia, like you said, domestic violence and those issues, and then the power that perhaps you can have through education, getting people early on. So I can understand how the passion was sparked.
Yeah.
So then
exactly.
Early career teaching during or just after COVID, that's a huge leap. I can only imagine the extra challenges as an early career teacher you had to face. How did you survive? How did you make it work?
I guess lucky, unlucky, depending on how you want to look at it. The school that I'm teaching in up in the Northern Peninsula area, we were not as affected by COVID, so we didn't have to do any remote teaching. We were still on the ground in classrooms, but we did have to do all the social distancing. We had lots of sending packets home and things like that, mainly because we don't really have access to good enough Wi-Fi and good enough internet to do remote teaching on a large scale. Lots of our students don't have the internet at home, don't have access to laptops or phones, so couldn't jump on Zoom calls or anything like that. So we're all coming into school, putting those desks out 1.5 meters apart and just doing mass instruction for the kids that could come and weren't too worried about the COVID kind of pandemic.
Living remote is often hard as far as getting back home for school holidays, as it is with transport or weather affecting your ability to go home. Were you able to get home during that time with the additional challenges of travel during COVID times?
Community made the decision that they were going to stay open. So lots of communities in our area decided to close off, which was fair enough. We know that Indigenous people are more at risk for getting things like COVID-19. Northern Peninsula area is a really big tourist hotspot as well. And so most of our economy does depend on tourists coming in during that dry season. So they stayed open, but to get down to Cairns, it's like a 2-hour flight. And then anywhere after that, you're on an additional flight. So I came from Brisbane originally. So it's like a full day of travel on a plane just to get home.
But I suppose the benefit for you working in the same state is that you continue to get your long service leave and your additional things that you can then use later, because some people going remote are doing it interstate and they've got, similar traveling challenges, but also then when they leave, they don't continue to get the transfer points.
Yeah.
So that's good for you. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Also,
yeah.
people listening might be interested that some communities are closed communities or have restrictions. So you need to get passes or approval to go into them, which wasn't the case with yours. But if people are listening and thinking of going remote, that's something for them to consider.
Yes, definitely.
And I think even beyond COVID, I know sometimes there are just general restrictions to stop tourists trampling over people's towns, communities, and sacred places. So something to be aware. So tell us, your early career, it is all fresh, new and exciting and fun. Tell us some of the fun or funny experiences that you've had as an early years teacher, because we haven't had that on the podcast yet. We haven't talked the fun.
Oh my goodness. I love it. Like when I went into teaching, it felt like I stepped back into my own skin, like it just felt like going back home. And I have so much fun with my kids and they think I'm ridiculous. I'm that teacher that's like singing and dancing up the front of the classroom, trying to like engage them. And they're like, Miss, just stop. Like, it's too much.
But secretly they kind of like, oh, isn't she lovely?
Secretly
and
they love
connections.
It. Yeah. I know they love it, because when I don't teach them, they're like, oh, Miss, we miss you. And I'm like, I know you miss me singing out musical theatre. I get it. It's fine. But if you wouldn't see me because we're on a podcast, but I am very, very fair, very white. And one of my favourite memories was with my grade 7s in my first year, just wearing a pair of sandals. And they're like, Miss, oh, your feet, they're so white. Like, what is going on? I was like, oh, it's the rest of me, I guess. It all matches.
Yeah.
So just little things like that, but they're so funny. They just love to tease you a little bit. And if you can like get into that relationship and rapport and be able to just like have that joke with them and have a bit of a laugh, you get along so much easier.
Because they're just as interested in you and your background as we are in them and theirs.
Oh, I swear, if they could just spend a whole lesson grilling me on my life, they would. Like, they do. They ask a lot of questions. And there's lots of horses up here as well. So the kids are fascinated with catching the wild horses and riding the horses. And so every so often during the year, the season will be that they'll all just come to school on their horses and tie them up outside the school gates and pop down at lunchtime to go feed them. You're like, oh, that's nice.
Wow,
who needs
so different.
You have a horse. It's great. I love it.
And so unique. Like I had a donkey or two at one of the places I was, and sometimes lizards would come into the classroom, but horses is something new I haven't experienced.
Yeah, I never thought I would have to say the sentence to a kid of, can you please take your horse off the school grounds? And don't ride your horse on the oval.
So the takeaway for teachers that are listening to this is expect the unexpected and just roll with it and have fun. Yeah. You definitely have to be a little bit adaptable and a bit agile to work in these communities. But if you can see the fun in everything, then you get along great. So we've spoken about the fun and the funny, and I suppose we can continue to explore some of the positives as well, that I'm sure there are many of. But there's also the challenges that you face, not only as a remote teacher, but as a graduate or early career remote teacher as well. So what are some of those unique challenges that you face?
Yeah, so I guess maybe other universities are different, but the one that I went to, QUT, was really good had a lot of behaviour management and a lot of curriculum planning as well. Chuck your curriculum out the window for the first 6 months in a remote school, because all you're going to do is behaviour management. And until you can get that down pat and the kids know that you've got your boundaries.
Yes, relationships.
Yeah. Very, very hard to actually get some content done, unfortunately. But you just have to get over that hurdle. And once they realise that you're in it and that you care about them and that you're serious about them wanting to learn and do well and having those high expectations, that's when you can bring the curriculum back in.
And I found that we're doing the structures, the setting up of the structures. So behavior management, as far as you're teaching them the structure of the classroom, and you're teaching them what a reading session might look like, as far as you might not be delving very deeply into the curriculum, but you're reading books, you're exploring, you know, making rotations, getting students walking around the classroom and interacting with and engaging with activities, whether or not you're able to delve very deeply into the curriculum. But the focus, exactly like you said, is relationships and behavior management. Because if you don't have that, how much are they actually going to learn anyway? Perfect. Agreed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about teaching those learning expectations and those learning behaviors as well. So in my community that I'm in, there's a really high absentee rate for the students. And so a lot of the time you'll get them into the classroom, but they actually don't know how to be in a classroom very well. They don't understand, or like they're not used to the sitting down and the going through the work. And you can do whatever model in the world, gradual release of responsibility, you can include this and this and this, but they don't have the skill set yet to just sit and focus. And so you're reteaching those basic skills that you'd expect students to be practicing all during primary school to get to high school. And so I think keeping that in the back of your mind as well is really important for a graduate teacher going remote, is that you need to start from scratch.
Do it for the 6 months as well, because you're also catching up those kids that haven't been in there in the first week or the second week, or, you know, come the first week, but then don't come for 4 weeks later.
Exactly, that you're constantly catching those kids up, and you're constantly grabbing kids that you haven't seen for 4 weeks. And you're like, oh, okay, here we go. You weren't here for the first 4 weeks. You don't know me. You don't know my expectations. Let's just go over it. It's no bad. It's fine. You're here now. We love that you're here. Yes. This is what my expectations are.
Yes, so true. And something that, like you said, you had a big focus on behavior management, which is amazing. But people who have come later in their career and perhaps don't expect things to be so different and so challenging, and they have to kind of switch your thinking and do things a different way, like you've described, it's a big change.
Yes. Exactly. And so I guess my advice would be, look at your essential skills of classroom management. They work if you use them right. Like that's the thing. You have to put the work in. You can't just do it for a lesson or a week or two and not see any change and then think, oh, that doesn't work, and throw it out the window. You have to do the mileage with it and let the students know basically that, like, oh no, this is how Miss does it. When I'm in Mrs. class, these are her expectations, and it's the same every single time. It's consistent, it's predictable, it's practicable. So students know from the get-go, I walk in the door, I sit down, this is my routine.
And you've moved up very quickly and had the opportunity to do leadership roles and progress, which is amazing. Can you tell us about the support that you've received in remote communities, or the PD you've done, or stepping up into higher roles and getting that experience before you took on the head of department? Amazing.
Yeah. So I was very lucky with the school that I went to, had an incredible, still do have, an incredible executive leadership team who support their teachers to the nth degree and will do whatever it takes to make sure that teachers feel supported, know what's going on, are comfortable in community, feel safe, have the resources that we need. They do whatever it takes, basically. And that's the motto for Far North Queensland, is #whatever it takes. And they fully embody that, which is incredible. So the opportunity that I had, we decided to implement a reading program across our college. So from prep to grade 10, we introduced a brand new reading program because we did some testing and we found out that we already knew it, but we had the data then to back it up, that our students' literacy level was really, really low compared to their grade and age level. And so we needed intensive intervention to target our students that had to be contextualized for them as well. So we threw all the programs out the window. So no more Jolly Phonics, no more PLD or whatever it is. And we created our own program, and it works, which is really exciting. And so they needed someone at the high school to head that up. And I was the right body in the right room at the time. And I was like, that sounds good. I'll do that. I'm passionate about literacy. I'm passionate about kids understanding curriculum and being able to access things, and reading is like the easiest way for a student to succeed. It's like the one skill that you really need throughout your whole life. So I'll head that up. Had an incredible year doing that. Very busy, very stressful year. But worked really, really closely with a lot of external agencies like the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing in Far North Queensland, the Centre for Reading and Writing. My school actually nominated me for a Noreen Wilcox Excellence in Education Award, and I got that. So I was one of the best beginning teachers in the region.
Wow.
So that was real. That was the kind of like the tick that I needed of, oh no, this is good. I'm doing the right thing.
Yes.
Like they see that I'm putting the work in. They see that I'm passionate about this, and that's the acknowledgement that I needed, you know?
Yeah.
And so worked very, very hard on that. Lots of data across the year, lots of meetings with like the regional office and our acting regional director. And so I was having these meetings with lots of higher ups, and I was like, I'm a second year teacher. Like, don't feel like I'm the like big imposter syndrome, you know, like I'm not the right body to be in here, like whatever it is. But it turned out well.
Yeah.
And then halfway through last year, so I was 18 months of teaching, the role came up for head of department for our juniors, for our 7 to 9s, who I'd done the most work with for the reading anyway, so I had a really good grasp of that cohort, and got the tap on the shoulder from my principal saying, look, we think you'd be good for this. It's an external application, but put your application in. We want to see your name in there. I was like, fantastic, let's go. Did my application, ended up getting the job for the 6-month contract, which was very exciting. I had no idea what I was doing, but lots of learning, lots of growth opportunity, lots of really great professional development conversations with my principal and with my deputy as well. And they steered me in all the right directions about which PDs I needed to be doing and like who I needed to talk to and like who to connect with and mentor with. And then for this year, the role went up again for a 12-month contract. So I had to reapply and then ended up getting the job again, which was very exciting. And again, that little affirmation of, oh, I'm doing the right thing. Like I'm actually meant to be here and I'm meant to be in this role. So it's very exciting.
And I think people listening would be inspired by your story there, because it shows that not only is age not a barrier, or, you know, time in teaching not a barrier, it's about being open-minded and putting your hand up and willing to have a go. And I think it's also that there are those leadership pathways there, and you get these opportunities that perhaps you wouldn't, like you might have been overlooked for in a larger city school. So that's really exciting to hear.
Yeah,
I loved
100%.
that you spoke of the support that you get in Far North Queensland. So I imagine lots of pre-service teachers are adding that to their to teach or to experience list, because you don't always have that level of support in every remote that you go to. So hearing that Far North Queensland has those structures and leaders that are willing to support new grads is really awesome to hear.
Yeah, I hope so. I love it up here. I honestly can't imagine myself going back to Metro anytime soon. And I think that's a good sign, you know?
Totally. And I also think it's really powerful, the program that you spoke about. So the reading program, where you have this across the school model, so that, like you were talking about, kids that aren't attending very much will fit and slip back into a program where they know how, well, they are getting a better understanding of how it works, because it's been done the year before when they went a couple of weeks, and then it's been done again here in high school. I think that's really powerful as well.
Yeah, and that's the reason that we did it. So when we looked at contextualizing the program, it was like, we've got such a high absentee rate for these students for a whole number of reasons.
Yes.
How do we hit them all, you know? And so by making the program as similar as possible from prep all the way up to grade 9, just with increasing levels of difficulty, you know?
Yeah.
It means that a student that's come maybe 6 months in grade 3 and a couple of months in grade 4, but then life has turned around a bit and they can come more consistently to school in grade 5 and grade 6, moving into high school, it's all the same. You know, they've got that expectation of, oh, I'm in my reading session, this is what it's going to look like. I know I have to sit down and do my phonics for 5 minutes, and then I have to do my blending, and then I have to do my segmenting, and then Miss might give me a book to read by myself, or Miss might read with me because she wants to hear me read out loud, and then I might play a game and do some literacy activities to kind of cement this phoneme that I've been learning about today. So
how powerful. And I also liked listening to you talk about the professional development that you had and the chance to go and do professional development. Do you find that that's a common thing across the schools in Far North Queensland, that either you get the PD on site and get supported, or you get given the opportunity to do other PDs as well?
Yeah, yes, 100%. tricky sometimes because obviously staffing is an issue. We know we have a teacher shortage across the nation. So where possible, my school was either giving me lessons off so I could do online PDs, or where possible, if I applied early enough and they could get the time off for me, sending me down to Cairns or down to Weipa and places like that are a bit bigger, a bit more of a centre, to be able to attend those things.
Wonderful, because in remotes, that's not always the case with the challenges. So the online learning is a big way for us to get our PD and remote. So that's amazing that with enough time, like you said, you were able to go. They invested in you. They really invested in you.
Yeah, obviously it's going to be different at each school, but at my school in particular, if you put it in early enough, generally that request will be approved because they understand that, one, the PD is important. It's important for us to keep developing and growing as teachers, but also we're so remote that sometimes you just need those 3 days down in Cairns to reset and come back a better teacher.
Great point. Just a short break to share books and resources by Hakea Hustler and Carl Merrison. The Children's Book Council of Australia Book Week Honour Book in 2019, Black Cockatoo, is a middle reader short novella set on Jaru country. While short, there are many jumping off points to explore. Tracks of the Missing is a WA Premier Book Award, Daisy Atamara Award shortlisted YA suspense thriller. Set in outback Australia, it follows Declan Archer in his race to find a missing busload of students. My Deadly Boots is a First Nations picture book about confidence, identity and connection. Carl and Hakea also have many more books out across the next few years, perfect for remote classrooms. Full teaching packs are available over on the website carlandhakea.com.au. We also create remote teacher resources, Getting to Know You, 2A Learning, NAIDOC, and much more over on our TPT store. So let's get back to this deadly interview. You suggested that you might like to talk about special needs. Tell us a little bit about special needs and how you've managed them.
So I think the important thing to kind of remember, in my context at least, is that all of my students are First Nations, so Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or both, and all of them are English as an additional language or dialect. So for them learning English, it's sometimes their fourth or fifth language after they've learnt all of their traditional language on top of it. So it's really hard for students to sometimes balance those two things and to code switch and to be able to jump from the traditional language into standard Australian English. So we find that most of our students have a really low literacy level that would be considered special needs or additional needs in any other metro school. So students in grade 7 kind of learning at a grade 4, grade 5 level on average. And the question's always, how do I differentiate my content to make sure that I'm reaching those students, but they're still achieving or like doing assessment at a grade 7 or a grade 8, whatever level it has to be. Because I can't just shift the whole curriculum down for them. They still need to be doing the grade 7, 8, 9 work.
Yeah.
So it's lots of differentiation, lots of collaboration with our learning hub, with our special education and additional needs support workers, and finding out ways to, I guess, best implement strategies that actually work for those students. 9 times out of 10, our most complex, challenging behaviours come from students not being able to access the content. Because if you sit in a class and you don't understand what's going on, you've missed a couple of weeks of school because you've had to go away for sorry business, or you've been down in Cairns for a medical appointment, whatever the reason, you come back in, you've got no clue what's going on. The easiest option is always just, oh, well, I'll get out of the situation, right? I'll act up, they'll send me out, they'll send me home, I won't have to deal with it. Better save face, I'll be the funny kid. It's easier to be the kid that makes a fuss than the dumb kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So strategies that we often use are really those literacy intensive support programs, like I spoke about with the reading program. My general pedagogy is always a gradual release of responsibility. I want to try and model everything as much as I possibly can for those students before I then send them out on their own. And before I send them out on their own, they're doing group work and they're deconstructing and they're analysing and they're looking at the meta language to figure out what the heck is actually going on in that piece of text, and then they can reproduce it themselves. And that seems to work as well for the students who do have those more additional learning needs. You just scale it down, right? So instead of looking at this grade 7 piece of text, I'm going to use the exact same skills, but we're looking at a grade 4 piece of text, or we're looking at grade 3. I'm not looking for them to go from a grade 4 to a grade 7 level in 1 year. We're looking for a year of growth, right? So if they're at grade 4, amazing, we're going to go to grade 5. And then next year we'll go to grade 6. And hopefully we get some bigger jumps in the middle there when the confidence comes in. But I'm not looking to try and like correct 4 or 5 years in one go, in one term.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think will give lots of people food for thought of how they're going to approach it in their classrooms too. But I loved the way you're describing things, and you're really aware of not using this deficit model, like First Nations kids don't attend school or they can't attend school, and that you really consider the reasons why they're not coming to school, such as the medical appointments, such as sorry business. Like these are legitimate reasons that they need to be away from school. It just so happens that the distance or the the cultural context of needing to go and spend that time grieving someone takes them away for a little bit longer. So it's not saying that they can't or they shouldn't or their families don't care about school or anything like that. It's acknowledging that there are reasons behind it that we have to understand and then work around, and of course encourage them to come more and find the barriers to attendance, but you're not putting this deficit lens on. So I appreciate that. I also like how you're talking of low literacy, but you're also acknowledging that intergenerational strength of they know 2 or more languages or dialects. They already know so much. They've got all this strength. They know, perhaps all the words for bush tucker out around the far north Queensland area, and they're able to speak with the language group down the road because they know that other language, like all these powers, and yet low literacy in standard Australian English. So you're finding their level and you're building them up. I think that's really powerful for new teachers to hear from you, Maddi. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, it was so encouraging. Like, yeah, their standard Australian English is a little bit low, but if I ask one of these students, why do you traditionally hunt a turtle compared to a dugong for certain ceremony? And I can get a full story. I can get the complete history for their specific region compared to their cousins who are from a different tribe, and the differences between those two things. There's so much knowledge there. And it's important that we recognize that. Like, it's not just about how well we can read and write in standard Australian English. We need to look at those multiple forms of intelligence. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You also talked about managing complex behaviours. What kind of tips do you have around doing that for new teachers who are heading remote?
Yeah. Set your expectations early, set them high. None of this nonsense about it's a remote kid, so we expect them to chuck a chair through the window or whatever.
Yeah.
When I came in, had the exact same expectations that I did when I did pracs in remote schools for those students, and they work because they want to achieve well. They know they can achieve well. And so my expectations are probably really high for a remote school, but my students achieve them every day. So why would I change them? I expect them to come in and sit down in their seats and to have their things out ready and to grab their resources and to be writing down the learning intention every single day. I expect them to be giving every single thing a go, whether or not they understand it. I expect them to be handing in their homework. I expect them to be handing in their assessment. I expect them to do the independent reading and independent reading time. And 9 times out of 10, they do it. The one time that they don't, that there's something else going on. And so that's when you dig into the relationship. And you're like, okay, so what's happening with this kid? Did you have breakfast? Has something happened at home that we don't know about? Did you sleep last night? Are there extra people in your house at the moment because there's something going on? Are you even in a bed at the moment? Do you just need to go into the guidance office or somewhere and go take a nap and then try again the next lesson? It's about knowing your students and knowing when those things might be going on and having the relationship where they can be like, yeah, look, miss, I skipped breakfast because whatever, I was out hunting. So I think that's the important thing. And when you don't have the relationship, that's when they burst,
And I think they're 2 prime key aspects to being a remote teacher. But I love your idea of high expectations, because it shows she believes in me. She believes that I can reach these high expectations, that you're creating this sense of safety in the classroom because kids know the expectations and the boundaries. And it's also the same every time they come to your classroom. They're not, oh, Miss Maddie's, like tough today or angry today or something today. Your expectations are always the same, and you're creating that sense of safety. Any other hints and tips?
I get a lot of my stuff from Berry Street, from the Berry Street model. So looking up their trauma-informed practice. If you're teaching remote, I would fully recommend at least getting on their website and deep diving and looking at some of their strategies. See if your school implements a Berry Street model, because it's most effective as a school-wide approach where every classroom is bringing out trauma-informed practice that is consistent, predictable, and just, safe. It makes the classroom feel safe. And when your kids feel safe, they feel like they can achieve. It all links.
And then you had ESLD students. So we've kind of touched on it, and you touched on it by pre-teaching vocabulary that they're going to use and supporting the low literacy learners. But how do you do that code switching and two-way kind of teaching and support for ESLD students?
Yeah. So where possible, I try and get a text in Creole, which is kind of the most common language up in the area, and then in English as well. And we will analyze across the text, because some words in Creole have different meanings to what they actually are in Australian. There are some sounds in standard Australian English that don't exist in Creole. And so it's important to have students practicing those things. And so where possible, I have that text so they can read across the text. We do lots of explicit breaking it down. Like I will read a text out loud and then be like, oh, that's a weird word, circle that, get them to write down the definition. We say the word. So it's lots of really explicit modeling and breaking down the text. Using audio where possible as well is really, really important, and having the subtitles on so they can hear the word and then see what it looks like as well, whether or not they can actually read it, but see what that word looks like when it's said is really important as well, especially for standard Australian English. When they're coming from Creole, again, lots of sounds don't exist in Creole that do in standard Australian or in other traditional languages. So bringing those two things together,
And do you have a Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander education assistant in the classroom with you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're very lucky that in most of our classrooms, we will have a local Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person who is fluent in standard Australian as well as Creole, and sometimes, if we're lucky, traditional language as well, depending on the area group. And they're able to do a little bit of translation for us as well when it gets a bit complicated. So there are some times where you'll say something to a student and they'll just look at you like the most blank look on their face, like, what on earth? And your teaching assistant will come in and be like, whatever, say it in Creole. And they're like, of course, and just start doing the thing. You're like,
why didn't you say it like that?
But I don't mind doing that either, because it means they've heard it in English and then they've heard it in Creole. And they're like, oh, so that means that. Cool, we're good.
Really, and great tips for people to use in week 1. Would you like to talk about this idea of low literacy teenagers and how you're supporting them? We talked a little bit about it before, but what's different? What they're afraid of baby talk, or the texts you choose. How do you approach it?
Yeah, so it's a little bit more tricky, than when you're just teaching prep or grade 1, grade 2, those standard reading skills. When you get to high school, there's that fear of, oh, I've missed the boat and I'm too old and this is prep and I don't want to be doing this because this is baby work. I guess it's trying to take the work, which is really geared for students in prep grade 1 and grade 2, and adding a high school lens on it. We know from research that 1 in 4 Australian students aren't graduating with the correct reading age. So lots of our kids have low literacy. It's not just EALD kids in remote settings. So we took our phonemes, we took those really basic skills and we tested our students, figured out where are your gaps, where are your deficits, where are your strengths, what are you really good at? And so then we kind of grouped those students just for a little bit to kind of do some intensive teaching to get everyone up to the same level. Now that we're kind of at that stage, we've made a lot of games out of our phonemes. So doing lots of like memory games, doing lots of piecing the things together, like race games to try and make as many words as possible. Our students love Around the World as a game. I don't know if anyone else remembers that from primary school, where they have to go around and as a class try and get from A to Z and make as many words as possible that include like a designated phoneme that we've chosen for that week to focus on. And then they love doing like definition races. They whip out the dictionaries and they're trying to like write down the definitions for word as quickly as possible. It's all about making it a challenge and making it kind of a competition for our kids. So if we can get them engaged in that regard and make it a bit more like, oh, let's see who's the quickest, like let's see who can think of the most words. It's not about them actually reading out loud and being the most fluent reader, but them not having the skills of like, oh, I go to a dictionary to get a definition. I can change the first letter in a word to make another word and it rhymes because that phoneme's the same, that sort of thing. So that worked for our high school students. When they've got those skills, it's then bringing in the, I guess, more curriculum text, you know, and bringing that back to, bring it back to classwork. And like, you've got the skills, now you can do this. And we know you can do it because you've done this. You've read this book, now you can read this one. For actual reading books, a resource that we use is called Riff readers. So they are more like lower literacy books, which are written at like a high school context. So they've still got the lower words, can be sounded out a lot easier, can be decoded a lot easier, but it's not a book about the cat sat on the mat. It's like a horror story or it's a fantasy or something. So it's more engaging for our kids. So they really like those and they will rip through them like as quick as you can imagine. So,
and they're feeling this success by the sounds of it as well. They're having fun. You're making it engaging and they're experiencing success as they go. I know there'll be lots of people listening really curious about your reading program and really curious about the way you're doing things. If people need to find out more, how do they find out more about this stuff?
So I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is Farm Fresh Teaching. So that's where I post a lot of my work and I post a lot of the resources that I use for literacy and EALD. You can also contact the school and we'll see what we can send out to you because it is a contextualized program. I wouldn't recommend just picking it up and running it in your own school, but we can send you the routes, you know.
And following you on Instagram and seeing how you're implementing it and the resources you're using and being able to connect with you and share, you know, new teacher journeys would be a really great way for people to learn more. Thank you so much for your time. You're a wealth of knowledge and it's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been so wonderful talking to you. I really enjoyed it.
Each podcast episode, we also try and highlight or spotlight or do a shout out for amazing businesses, organisations, groups and services that are working in remote communities. This could be run or owned by First Nations people or services that regularly are committed to going into remote communities and listening and working with First Nations people. So here is our shout out and spotlight for this episode.
The Berry Street education model provides strategies that enable teachers to increase engagement of students with complex, unmet learning needs and to successfully improve all students' self-regulation, relationships, well-being, growth, and academic achievement. In today's changing world, many primary and secondary school students encounter daily challenges that can impact their success at school. Despite best efforts and intentions, schools often require specialised strategies to address students' needs for healing, growth and achievement. And that's where Berry Street says that their education model comes in. They offer a suite of structured professional development and consultation and mentoring opportunities for school leaders and teachers. The delivery of the Berry Street Education Model course employs a blended learning methodology based on instructors' experience, peer collaboration, and opportunities for participants to pilot learned strategies in their schools. The facilitators provide support between sessions as well, including the option for individual conferencing or consultation. Berry Street say that they equip specialist schools with strategies to facilitate students' cognitive and behavioural change, thereby increasing student engagement,
to significantly progress their academic achievement. The Berry Street model has been used in many remote communities around Australia, and often people talk about the success, way that they feel empowered to support their students. So if this is something that you're interested in, it's well worth talking to the school about who has done it previously, if there's any in-school upskilling that you can have, and if there is time and space and funding for you to go yourself on a Berry Street education model course to learn more. Head to the Berry Street website, which is in our show notes, to learn more about the course. You've been listening to the Remote Teacher Podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things remote outback teaching. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, join our email list, and our Facebook group, Teachers in Remote Communities, Past, Present and Future. Any important links mentioned or businesses or organisations to support your remote teaching that our guest has mentioned today will be in the show notes, so make sure you have a look at them to find out more. And a reminder again that this podcast can be downloaded so you can access it when you do not have internet coverage or reception. So you can listen to it on your long drives between communities in the outback. Thank you for listening. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode of The Remote Teacher.